This is Hospitality 1-to-1, conversations on the industry. Here's your host, Chris Bettis.
Joining us today is Cara Silletto. Cara, thank you so much for taking time today to talk to us. I know your background, your pedigree, if you will, is everything we'd love to talk about when it comes to generational gap, when it comes to turnover. These are hotspot issues in the hospitality industry and elsewhere, so I appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I have a kind of a unique background here of today. People might need to know, first of all, kind of what I do. And today we help companies reduce unnecessary employee turnover by making managers and leaders more effective in their roles and by bridging generational gaps. That's our primary work. And so my background is unique because I am one of the oldest millennials. I was born in 1981. And of course, it depends who you ask as to what years they are, but I would say through and through I have a millennial mindset. So I am one of the oldest millennials, and then I've actually been a professional performer since age 7, and I've been on stage my whole life. So today I spend a lot of time on stage as a professional speaker and or as a trainer and facilitator, working with leadership teams to help them bridge those gaps and become stronger leaders. So that's an interesting piece of my background of how I got to where I am today, is having that musical and theater background, both being on stage. But I also have my undergrad degree was in corporate communication, and then I went back to get my MBA in entrepreneurship. So not only to start my own business, but just because I realized that every business needs to be entrepreneurial today and innovative today, constantly changing and evolving. So that's my educational background. And I started training and teaching. Believe it or not, I went overseas and I was an English trainer in Germany for executives, not for children, but for German professionals, a lot of engineers and sales teams, for example, that I help them understand the American business culture and top level English skills for negotiating and things like that. So it was kind of this perfect storm of the training background with the performance background with the MBA that has led me to a great career today of helping business leaders make their companies sustainable long term.
Wow. What a unique transition to go from on-stage performance to what you do now. Yes, you're on stage, but to take that skill set you had and be able to carry it over into this marketplace, it's a insightful and very unique, transition. It's a different move.
It really is. I don't meet very many people who have a similar background. There's a few of us. It's funny when a bunch of speakers get together for our speakers convention, we have jam sessions because you do know that there are a lot of musicians and singers and performers. It's kind of funny how many of us have snuck in. But nowadays I don't sing professionally anymore. I just do this and I still get my rush on stage, which is awesome, but get to bring more business value to it. So it's kind of a blend of the perfect world.
You said something when you first kicked off. You're talking about millennials, and you kind of relate to millennials, and I really want to, pick your brain on that. When it comes to being a millennial, what define, other than an age, which we've kind of talked about, it can vary by a couple of years. Define a millennial. What makes a millennial a millennial? Like what's unique about them as opposed to the generations that have come before?
That is a great question. And in fact, Chris, we focus on that particular thing of it is not about your birth year. It's about your mindset. That's what makes somebody a millennial. And what I mean by that is we were raised in a different time than the previous generations. That's why the generational researchers can do all the research they do and can put people into buckets and put a start and end date on those time frames. But what really makes millennials, if we look at in particular the 80s and 90s, what changed in our society during millennials' formative years, there are some pretty major societal things that happened that changed the way that millennials see the world. And again, it doesn't apply to every single millennial, but most of us had experiences such as divorce peaked in the 1980s. So most of us saw our parents or our best friends' parents split before we hit 20. And that means that we have a different outlook on the word commitment and loyalty, because my mom left my dad when I was about 11, 12 years old. And she always told me, don't ever depend on a spouse or a company for that matter, because right after the divorce happened, she had gotten her accounting degree. And between the time that my mom left my dad and before I hit college, my mom got laid off 3 times as a corporate accountant. Even though she got stellar performance reviews and every boss loved her, they would outsource, offshore, centralize, decentralize, all these different strategies that came into the corporate world, primarily in the 1990s, because the internet came in and caused globalization. So coupled with the divorce peak in the 80s and the huge boom of mass layoffs that occurred in the 90s, and even since then, of course, that is when the millennial generation saw that there is no such thing as loyalty. It's not a guarantee anymore. It's very different that we look at the world like any relationship, it has to be mutually beneficial to stay in that relationship, whether it's personal or professional. Company is only going to keep me as long as they need me and can afford me. And I'm only going to stay at that company so long as I like my job and like my boss and don't get a better offer. So it's a very different dynamic. So those are a couple things that make millennials. I'd say another big thing that happened in the 80s and 90s is the rapid technology changes that occurred. And so the way that I talk about that is I ask everybody in my programs, when you were a little kid, how did you listen to your favorite song over and over again? And boomers will say, oh, we had record players. And Gen Xers, well, you know, we had a little bit of transition records, some 8-tracks, and then cassettes once we were a little older. But you look at millennials, we started with cassettes, quickly went to CDs. We started downloading on Napster before I hit college. And then before my 21st birthday, we had iPods. So it was this rapid change of out with the old, in with the new. If you don't keep up, you're going to be left in the dust, because those big boom boxes, remember the giant boom boxes from the 80s? They just kept getting smaller over time. And now who buys stereos? All we need is Bluetooth speakers for our phones, because we can get anything, anywhere, anytime now. So what we believe that impacts in the work world and with millennials as employees is our comfort level with change is very different than previous generations who had a mentality of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, this worked just fine for me for the last 10 years. I've been doing it this way. Why do I have to change? Why do we have to automate that? No, I'm just fine writing it down like I always have. And then you've got the millennials who just roll their eyes and say, are you kidding me? There's an app for that now. Why would anybody do that manually? And so it causes a lot of frustration and friction in the workplace, because you've got one end of the spectrum that really loathes change at the extreme end, and the other end who demands change and will quit a job if the hardware or software is too outdated. And that is that's a real generational difference right there. Now, again, it doesn't apply to every single millennial or every person from a certain generation, because we often talk too about what I call old soul millennials, which is really a baby boomer mindset trapped in a millennial body. And those are people, for example, they may not be change agents. They may be someone who says, I like my comfort zone. This works just fine for me. I don't need to upgrade my software every year or my new phone, every year or two, things like that. And typically what we have found, Chris, this is fascinating to me. What we find is anytime I get a chance to talk to old soul millennials, they usually have one of 4 backgrounds or a combination. So this is going to make them different than the way I was raised and different than most millennials, grew up. The first is they may have a different cultural background. So if they are either foreign born or their parents were foreign born, then they're going to be in a different spot as far as hierarchy, American millennials are very egalitarian. We believe everybody's equal, versus those from other cultures and or people who were raised in previous generations. They respect that chain of command and the hierarchy much more. So that's a big difference. Another one is that sometimes old soul millennials were raised by grandparents or much older parents. So it's like they were a generation early kind of thing. Another is that many of them grew up in a small town or even just a very conservative town or conservative household that stuck to traditional values. And then the last is that some of them have a military background. Either they themselves as a millennial were in the military or their parents were military, and so they grew up in a more militaristic chain of command kind of household. So that's going to make somebody who might be a millennial by birth year, those are the people that say, I am not a millennial. I do not characterize myself as any of those stereotypes, and I don't put myself in that bucket. It's probably because they're more of an old soul or have some old soul tendencies on a few things.
Now, you're talking about the different generations, and we, again, going back, baby boomer, Generation X, millennial, and it seems like there's a pattern. So when you had the baby boomers and they looked at the Generation Xers, those whippersnappers, those kids nowadays, and now you've got the Generation Xers who have kids and they're looking at these millennials, and you think, any other stereotype, the man buns and the and the half-grown beards and, whatever, and the stereotypical. And, I know there's an artist right now, a singer who's made some popularity off of a song he did about millennials. Has been making the rounds. I guess, why do you think one generation tends to look so negatively on the next generation? Because it seems to be a pattern for each generation.
Oh, yeah. Well, I once heard, and I wish I had the source of this. I've not been able to go back and figure out who said it, but I once heard that somebody said anything new after age 35 is ridiculous and unnecessary. And so I think as young people in general, even if we look back at the boomers when they were young, they didn't say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? They didn't do that when they were 20 because they were ahead of their time and they were the new generation. But then once you hit your stride in adulthood and you feel like I've learned a lot, I've grown a lot, I've changed a lot, now I'm good. And so I think once you get into that groove as an adult and once you get into leadership, then you say, okay, this is the way the business world works. I get it now. I figured it out. I've innovated to some extent, but I don't necessarily want to keep recreating the wheel. Again, it's about that kind of groove and comfort level that people reach. So I'll be very curious to see with the millennials if that continues to happen because we are a much more diverse group as well and are more open to seeing things in different ways and embracing diversity and all kinds of diversity, just people who think differently, not just about race, religion, gender, generations, and things like that. So I'll be curious to see how that happens with millennials once we get well above 35, if we kind of slow down. But honestly, it's more about our society today is fast paced and it is changing. And so anybody, I don't care if you're 55 or 25, if you are set in your ways, you're going to struggle. It's going to be a struggle moving forward because everything is changing. We're seeing disruptive technology come into 100-year-old industries that is just tanking them. And that's very scary because it's not about longevity anymore. It's more about innovation and how progressive can you be? Can you solve problems with new technology? And now everybody's jumping into this Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. How can we use those things? And is it going to last or is it not? And if it does last, a lot of people who laughed at those things are going to feel dumb, like, oh, this internet thing is a fad, right? Remember that? Remember when people said, oh, this will never take hold in business. And so that may not take, it may take off and people will be left behind, or it may not, or it may crash and burn. And then a lot of people who did invest time and money in that space will feel dumb. And we just don't know. So the thing about today is just keeping up with those things. And in the pulling that back into what we do with employment issues and turnover in particular, the reason I bring up that issue and kind of that mindset is because we consistently check in with our customers, don't we? We check on what do they want, when do they want it, how do they want it delivered. We have made so many changes because of market research for our customers over the years, adjusting the way they check in, the way they are served, all these things, the amenities that we offer today. And then when I go to employers and I say, okay, great, you've kept up with your external customers. What have you done to evolve with your internal customers, which are your employees? And I just get that deer in a headlight look of, well, we never really thought of them that way. Like, we thought they should be happy to have a job because we're their employer and we're giving them a paycheck. Isn't that good enough? And that is not good enough. That does not work today because everybody's hiring. We're in an employees market where your staff can easily hop. They can easily jump ship and go somewhere else today. And so we have to think of our employees as internal customers and do the market research, figure out what they want, what they need, and change. Just like the times are changing with our services and products that we offer, we have to also evolve with the way we manage and lead our teams and recruit and retain our staff.
You know, you're talking about turnover, and I wanted to kind of delve into that a little bit because when you think of turnover, I know in the hospitality industry right now it's running around, plus or minus 70%, which is a very high turnover rate. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is such high turnover? And we're talking about the hotel industry, but you could apply it to almost any industry. Why is there such a high turnover?
Yeah, part of it is what I just mentioned, that we are in an employees market today. Everybody's hiring. And if you think about the hospitality field, hospitality workers don't just hop from one hospitality business to another or from one hotel to another. You're competing also with food service, with logistics companies and package handler jobs at Amazon warehouses and things like that. You're competing against other low-wage workers, low-wage working positions in totally different fields. I see people in healthcare that are job hopping over to manufacturing and vice versa. I mean, it's unbelievable how much job hopping is happening. And it really comes back to there's access to job information now that we did not have 10 plus years ago. There is a great economy with low unemployment, so everybody's hiring, and I can literally, if I don't like the way you just talk to me, I can leave during my break and never come back, and I will have a job tomorrow. I mean, that's what's happening. Is it's not even giving their 2-week notice. They just don't come back for their next shift, or they're a no-call, no-show. A lot of clients also tell me people just don't even show up to day one because they got another offer, for example, and they don't even have the courtesy to call and say, hey, I took another offer and I'm not going to be there for orientation. So it's kind of a perfect storm today of the employment market itself, coupled with the entitlement factor. I'm not going to skirt around it. Millennials are entitled. But if we look back to why that is, we go back to the 80s and 90s, Chris. And you know what changed in our society? This is incredible to me when I figured out why millennials are so entitled. It goes back to the 80s and 90s when personal credit cards became mainstream for middle-class families. We were the first generation whose parents had credit cards and could start keeping up with the Joneses, even if they didn't have the cash in their pocket. And so that explosion in the commercialization of holidays, for example, of crazy birthday parties, huge amounts of presents under the Christmas tree, things like that, we were the beneficiary. And we didn't even know that people used to get fruit and nuts in their stockings. I mean, are you kidding me? I would have thrown the stocking at my parents. No, not really. But, but that's the truth of previous generations. They were thrilled to get those things and to get a present for their birthday or a present for Christmas. And so we do have this heightened sense of entitlement of wanting what I want when I want it, as well as what I mentioned earlier, too. I'm telling you, it's a perfect storm here, that the millennials are more egalitarian. We believe everybody should have a say. We believe everybody should be respected and valued, no matter where they are in the hierarchical chain or what job they have at that hotel or that company. And so if you put that up next to or under, working under somebody who's very hierarchical and says, pay your dues, you haven't earned your stripes yet, kiddo. You got to be here a while before you earn respect or before you get a say in our decisions and that type of thing. That is causing tons of people to just walk out the door because they don't feel heard, they don't feel appreciated. And also today, there's a big change in that work-life balance, people call it. We say work-life integration. And when you've got a 24/7 operation to run like a hotel, you have to fill 24/7 positions. And so now you have to work around people's schedule. I got to pick up my kids at this time on these days of the week. And we have a ton of single moms and dads out there, or even just divorced mom and dads who have blended families. We've got these kids on these days and these kids on these days. And I'm the person responsible for picking them up at 6. So yes, I'm watching the clock. And yes, I have to leave by 5 or 5:05 because I got to get across town to get my kiddos. And that was completely different with previous generations when the men would work and could work long hours and stay late and work a double. And the wife took care of all of that stuff at home, where now you have dual income families, you've got single income and single parent families. And people are just saying, look, a job is not worth it anymore to sacrifice for my family and to miss my holiday celebrations and things like that. Because a lot of our parents, let's face it, our parents missed all that stuff. My dad was a workaholic. He missed my games. He missed my recitals. And now that he is retired, he turned around and told all of us, don't do it. It's not worth it. Don't put the company before your family because you could get laid off or you're going to regret it later that you sacrificed so much for your family. So I know I'm kind of giving you like a smorgasbord of things that are happening right now, but Chris, this is our reality, isn't it? I mean, this is exactly what the employers are dealing with. And until you know all these different components of the reality of today's new workforce, it is really hard to attract and retain the right people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I as you talk about this, something else that had come to mind was retirement. I think back to my parents' generation, and they had it was commonplace. You worked at a job for 30, 40, 50 years, you got a pension. That pension carried you the rest of your life. Now there's 401ks, and not to get into the weeds about it, but they're transferable. So you work at company A for a couple of years, you earn some money in the 401k, you can transfer it to the next company. So in reality, even from a retirement standpoint, it's not necessarily a prerequisite to stay with a certain company because there is no real long-term incentive in many cases to stick around with the company because you can carry it with you when you go.
Exactly. And that relationship changed, Chris. That employer-employee relationship used to be, I'll take care of you, you take care of me. And that was in the form of pensions and other long-term benefits. As soon as companies cut that, how do they expect anybody to stay loyal to them when they don't offer those golden handcuffs? That's really what it was, is you had a lot of people from previous generations that stayed at companies for 30, 40 years. Were they really happy? Come on. No. Some of them were. Some of them loved their career and loved that company and their boss. A lot of them did it for food on the table, a steady paycheck, and for their pension. They would have left halfway through that career if they didn't have those golden handcuffs. And so really companies kind of did it to themselves by getting rid of that, which granted, pensions aren't fundable these days. It does not make financial sense to guarantee that type of long-term benefit, but they need to realize that the moment they change that relationship with the employees, that it goes in both directions. So yes, it's a huge difference now that those 401ks are transferable. And let's be honest too, a lot of younger employees aren't even thinking about retirement. Yeah. They are not there yet. They have no 401k and they don't even care what your matching plan is, because I'm probably not going to be here long enough to get vested anyway. So
now,
different.
It brings up an interesting thought too, because when I think of, I turned 40 last year. So I guess you could say, depending upon what model, I'm either Generation Xer or I'm a late stage millennial, depending upon whose age bracket you look at it. But I've noticed an interesting trend where for the longest time, my generations before us, it was you could go out, you could literally graduate from high school, go to, for example, the automotive industry, get hired at a factory, and you would make a great living for you, your family, your kids. You could do just as well with the college degree as without the college degree. Yeah. And then there was this trend upward where the focus became you required a college degree to get anywhere. And now I'm almost seeing it, if not level off, drop a little bit because of the astronomical costs of college tuition nowadays. How do you think, you're looking at a millennial right now who's just starting off in the workforce. Mm-hmm. They're walking in day one before they've ever even started at ABC company. And in many cases, they're saddled with tens, and in some cases, if not close to $100,000 in debt. How does that impact them going into a career, and how can companies relate to that, and how can they help or address that, if you, when it comes to working with those millennials?
Right. So lots of factors there. One is, yes, most students now, I think the average coming out of a 4-year public institution with a bachelor's degree is about $30,000. And so a lot of people, as you said, have even more than that, and they're taking jobs that are less per year than what they owe in student debt. It's ridiculous. Thank goodness we are seeing the pendulum swing back from forcing everybody into 4-year degrees. We're seeing that swing back. We're seeing a ton of trade schools pop back up. We're seeing a lot of companies, and this is one that's hard for some groups to grasp, but I am seeing a lot of companies start to reduce the number of degree required positions, which is great, because if you think about it too, when we require a degree for a job that really does not need to be somebody with a degree. It's not that only people with a degree would be successful in that job. When we require a degree, you are setting yourself up to make that position a stepping stone.
Yep.
So they will not be there long, because they know that's an entry-level position, or it was just to get their foot in the door and to get some experience, and they are planning to move quickly. So some companies realize that, and they're backing off on the degree required element in their job descriptions and things, because they can actually get more loyalty and a longer tenure from somebody who is more grateful to have that opportunity and grateful to have the job because they don't have a degree. So we are seeing that kind of swing back, and I think that will happen in the hospitality field as well. I'm seeing it a lot with IT. A lot of IT companies don't care if you have the degree. They want to know, what do you know how to code? What can you build for me? Seeing a lot, of course, in the trade areas and things that we're getting trade school funding again. States are bringing trade school programs back and grants back. High schools are starting to push for more people to not go the college track. And so we're going to see a shift in the workforce level of formal education and a lot more nano degrees. Mm-hmm. So that's something I think in the hospitality world would be fantastic to support and to promote nano degrees of hospitality information. Do they need to go get a 4-year liberal arts degree with all those extra classes? No, you need them to be stellar at customer service and at hotel management and operations. How does a hotel function, for example? So making and supporting those kind of nano degrees or certifications could be a huge leg up for a lot of organizations in that space.
That's a great point. I mean, don't get me wrong. I would certainly hope that, if I have to go into surgery, that my surgeon's gone through many years of college. I get that. I mean, there are definitely professions.
Don't get me wrong.
That require degrees, but I also agree with you that there are some that you have to question. Does the School of Life experience does that also entitle you to some growth in your career as well? Yeah. Before we're nearing the end here. We got a couple minutes left. I want to talk about two other areas.
Okay.
Obviously, let's talk about Crescendo, because we kind of talked a little bit about the turnover. We talked about, when it comes to the generational gap. But one of the other hot button issues you've kind of brought up is creating, and I believe you have it here. It says creating stronger leaders. How do you help do that?
Right. So we believe that the number one way to reduce employee turnover is to make your managers more effective. All of your supervisors and managers, top level executives down to your third shift frontline supervisors, they've got to be better. And we cut training and development years ago, 10, 15 years ago, even before the recession. Most companies had tried to be lean, and they cut a lot of the training and development for people who got their first job in management and supervisor roles. We kind of threw them to the wolves and said, just figure it out. Good luck. Now you've got these 5 people to manage. And that has now come back to haunt most companies, because they have promoted people over the last 15 years who don't know how to communicate with their staff. They don't know how to give feedback and reward in a meaningful way, recognize people in a meaningful way. They can't deal with conflict. They certainly don't understand this millennial mindset and just roll their eyes thinking these kids are lazy and entitled and have no loyalty, and get very frustrated by it, which then causes more turnover. So what we do is we bring the aha moment to the management that things have changed, that the workforce has changed, and that we need to evolve as leaders with that workforce to be sure that we are listening to them and that we meet their expectations, because we are lucky to have our staff today, as we know they can go elsewhere. So we make leaders stronger by teaching them about the millennial mindset to help bridge that generational gap. We teach a lot about what's going on in the workforce itself today. How is the workforce changing, and what are we projecting for the future, the next 5 to 10 years of the workforce? One of the things we just started really talking about, and I just wrote a book that focuses on the fact that we are shifting to a shorter term workforce. So managers don't really know how to deal with that. They're used to just coming in and onboarding somebody who's going to stay 3 to 5 to 10 plus years. And now you're seeing people stay 6 weeks, 6 months. And the managers are just pulling their hair out because the onboarding is not done well. And it's not really designed for shorter term workers or for so much churn in the organization. It was designed for you to stick around for a while. So we help leaders better onboard people, better manage and mentor their people, and overall just shift their mindset of you cannot manage people the way you managed in the 90s or even the early 2000s. I mean, that was almost 20 years ago, the early 2000s. And yet I see manager after manager still in a punitive approach. If you're late one more time, we can't manage like that today. It's got to be more incentive-based and more egalitarian of treating everybody with respect, even on day one.
You had a tremendous segue here, because that brings up my last question. You talked about that book of yours, and I believe you said it's coming out March 6th, March 6th, March 7th. So if people are out there and they're like, wow, I really want to get into the Cara's mind and actually read more of this book, how are they going to get it?
Absolutely. So the book is called Staying Power: why your employees leave and how to keep them longer. And it will be available that second week of March on Amazon.
Okay.
You can do pre-orders right now on our website, crescendostrategies.com/staying power. Will take you right to where you can order the books. The pre-orders are all signed, and we have a discount for you as well. If you want to do that, you can buy 1, 2, or 10 books online. But with Amazon, of course, you'll be able to get those pretty quickly in March as well. And the book is pretty cool. I'm so excited about it because it covers the employment market right now, what these changes have been and why we're in a challenging situation. It covers the evolution of employee expectations over the last 50 years, which is a pretty cool timeline to look at. It dives into the millennial mindset with a whole chapter about what makes millennials. And then finally, it offers strategies and immediately actionable tactics for reducing turnover and better meeting the needs of your staff today. So it's going to be an amazing tool for companies to use and to go back to. A lot of the folks who've read it already said this is just a great tool that I can read and reread and use almost like a tool book or a toolbox and a roadmap for retention of what I need to do next.
Very exciting. Of course, make sure you pick up a copy of her book. Now, if people want to reach out to you directly, how can they get a hold of you?
Sure. Cara, C-A-R-A, at crescendostrategies.com. And you are welcome to give me a call directly. 812-207-0739 comes directly to me. I love to hear from folks about what they're dealing with today, any successes that you're seeing with retention initiatives, any challenges or questions you have that I can answer. I'd love to connect.
Terrific. I'll tell you what, fascinating conversation. We could go on longer, but unfortunately the time is up. We're going to put a link both to Cara's contact information as well as a link to where you can get a copy of her new book. Again, it'll be on our website. That's going to be yourhotelrecruiter.com. And, of course, you can catch past episodes of our podcast. Just go to the podcast tab. And don't forget to like us on Facebook as well. Again, Cara, great talking to you. A tremendous discussion. Wish you nothing but the best of luck with the new book and as you move forward in 2018.
Thank you, Chris.
Have a great day.
You too.